things. One is kids are going to emulate, model behaviors that parents engage in. How many women grew up with a mother who used a lot of language, negative self-talk about their body image, negative body image, and a lot of language and behavior around dieting?
Hey, welcome back to the 187th episode of the Athletes Podcast, where today we feature Coach Andrew Coates. He's provided a wealth of knowledge to the sports, fitness, health industry, writing for health magazines like T Nation, Men's Health, Muscle and Strength, Generation Iron, and most recently, Arnold's Pump Club, just to name a few. We discuss the importance of parents' physical health and wellness in front of their kids, developing those healthy habits from a young age, how important it is as an athlete to introduce those things just as healthy habits, not as things you need to do to achieve or excel in life, sport, etc. These are just good habits for your overall health. A scoring method for how you should eat your food, buckets that you should maybe put them in. Again, in the episode, Andrew dives a ton into it. We were actually fortunate enough to do this interview in Andrew's home in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We are also promoting the fact that he's got a conference coming up in a couple of months. You can see in the link descriptions down below all the necessary links that you can go to check out his conference. It's going to be amazing. Got previous guests like Lee Boyce coming to attend, Jordan Shallow as well. This episode has encouraged me to set new fitness goals. I was inspired after this conversation. I really look up to the way Andrew approaches social media, fitness, health, his own business, the way he applies himself both on and off the camera, I guess you should say. Just really impressed by the way he approaches every single day, and it seems like he's got something figured out, put it that way. You know what else I have figured out is my morning routine. I include Rooted. If you haven't heard us talk about it, it's our electrolytes, hydration, immunity, 25 vitamins and minerals, 3 times the electrolytes of sports drinks, as well as 13 probiotics. Again, everything you need in one simple packet. There's going to be a barcode, something that comes up here, little show reel that shows you exactly what's included. This stuff's legit. Adam Chimera is the founder. Great guy. I love the brand. I can't wait to continue doing more with them. Each guest on our podcast gets some of this Rooted. It's the best women's, men's, and prenatal options. Give it a go. Use the code AP20 for 20% off. The rest of our discounts are included down below in the show notes. This is episode 187 of the Athletes Podcast featuring Andrew Coates. Here we go. Andrew Coates, I'm excited to feature you on the Athletes Podcast. Again, having your perspective, knowledge, wisdom. As you start off your podcast, I thought I'd maybe let you share how you got into the sport, strength and conditioning industry, what got you started, what got you motivated to writing for all of these incredible articles, news opportunities out there. I guess, how would you call it? How would you describe it?
I guess published writing. Would be the way to describe that. First of all, the fact that you guys came to town and are literally in my office to record this is actually cool. So honored. And you've had some of my good friends in the industry on, so this is amazing. I'm from Newfoundland, rural Newfoundland, and I grew up playing, I'm old enough that there was no, the internet came online at, I was an early teen, so there wasn't much to do. We started with one channel on TV, and then we had 13 for a while. And I got a Nintendo when I was 8. So we're playing a lot of sports, right? There's you're running around the woods. There's the old jokes about your parents didn't really care where you were. You're running around, and then you just came home whenever, right?
So the streetlights came on, right?
Exactly. That's what. Well, did we even have streetlights back in that little rural town? I think we did. Anyway, even the roads weren't paved, to give you an idea of this stuff. Rural Newfoundland. So, but we played everything we could get our hands on, and my parents very gratefully were very interested in having us involved in sports. So. One of the things that we did was cross-country skiing. So did a lot of that young, won a couple provincial medals in that. I think I was probably 11 or 12 at the time, I think. And then I didn't really enjoy that. I figured my top-end ability was not going to take me to a national level. And I'm a young kid who was getting tired of doing all the hours of training. But me and my brother got really interested in basketball, so we played a lot of basketball through high school. Now, at 6'2", rural Newfoundland basketball, we are also not destined for the NBA or anything like that. So, went to university, Bachelor of Commerce degree, didn't really do a lot of consistent sports or anything like that. A little bit of working out, but really never, it really didn't take hold. When I was 24, it finally did. Got really serious about the gym, put on a lot of muscle over the course of 7 months, transformed my identity, sense of self, confidence, all of the good things that came with it. And a lot of that stuff came from being in a gym environment where my old friend, university friend, Frank McGrath, who's a very well-known pro bodybuilder, he was literally working out in the rack next to us half the time. And I mean, he's an iconic and well-known figure. Mm-hmm. Again, Newfie, right? IFBB Pro. So growing up around that culture, reading publications, I have stacks of old muscle and fitness magazines and whatnot. And then, to be able to say later on I'm writing for those things is very surreal. So go across the country, changes of life, what have you. And then eventually at 32, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here, a lot of ups and downs. But at 32, the gym I was working out in, the staff just kept asking me to come work there as a trainer. So it wasn't this, hey, I fell into this, it was a, hey, I fell into this career. I wasn't the passionate 19-year-old right out of school, let's get certified, I want to help people. Like, I never even would have imagined that this was a career path, especially where I came from. And so it found me, I was overwhelmed at the start, it was definitely challenging, but jumped off to a good start, enjoyed it, was able to gradually earn more and more of a livelihood. And then I started really getting interested in learning and soaking up knowledge. I started reading publications like T Nation Online, diving into people like Dr. Layne Norton's nutrition stuff, getting into precision nutrition stuff, and just a massive array of the authorities in the industry. Renaissance Periodization, Dr. Mike Israetel, my friend Lee Boyce, reading his stuff on T Nation, Tony Gentilcore, you name it, etc. A guy like Dean Somerset, then realized, wait a second, Dean actually worked for the same company I do. Yeah. Like wild, small world. And just continue to voraciously consume knowledge as I also worked tirelessly within coaching. Lots of sessions, happy clients, that it turned into a lot of referral business. And so it became very self-sustaining. And then I eventually left that old company after 6 years there. There were a lot of problems with it. I won't get into specifics. Went out on my own. And around that time, I met a good friend of mine named Dean Guido. And Dean, after seeing me playing around with some YouTube stuff, wanted to start a podcast, thought, hey, you'd be a good co-host. Do you want to do that? So that's where the podcast came from. My friend just wanted to. And so we did it for a very long time. We did, I think, 150 episodes of the old format. And then his wife was pregnant with their first kid. He said, I have to step away, but you absolutely have to keep this going. Yeah. So it's almost 140 episodes on my own, and we're talking over 5 years of doing it, so that's fine. And then along the way, I started to travel to fitness conferences, so I met a lot of other people just like me in the fitness industry, people on the same path, a lot of the authorities, whether it's your Mark Fisher of Mark Fisher Fitness, or Tony Gentilcore, Jonathan Goodman, Dr. Mike Israetel, met him in 2017 at a conference that he did here, and it just mushrooms from there, these connections, these people that you meet. And that, of course, led to a lot of people who make for great podcast guests. Like Mike was one of our first 10, Sohee Lee was one of our first 10 podcast guests, and those just caused massive spikes in listenership, which was great, right? Luck in a lot of ways. And then one of the podcast guests we asked after a while was Danny Sugart, who's a longtime writer and editor for T Nation. And I'd already been writing for my own website because I was interested in doing this. And then so Danny turned around, she was a great guest, and then asked very sheepishly, as if she expected I would turn her down, if I would like to come and write for T Nation. Of course, I'm like, holy shit, like, I've been reading this, for years. So I said yes, put something together, they published it. And there's a lot of people get in there and they'll do one or two, but a lot of the authority figures in the industry have been there for a really long time. Again, your Martin Rooney's, your Ben Bruno's, your Brett Contreras, your Eric Cressey's, etc. There's a laundry list of these type of people. Mm-hmm. And so I just decided to keep sending them stuff, and I wanted to do the classics better than ever and practical stuff that was a little innovative but not cuckoo creative. And so they love all my stuff, and I study writing. Right behind me I have tons of books on writing, so I even teach that stuff to other coaches. And that led to Generation Iron in my inbox one day going, hey, we want you to come write for us. And that led to opportunities eventually with Muscle Fitness Magazine, eventually led to Men's Health, most recently Kabuki Strength, Barbend, and some other really cool things. Again, connections through the industry. It led to getting published on Arnold Schwarzenegger's email newsletter called Arnold's Pump Club, which that's sort of surreal. And I look back and I'm sort of like blown away with all the opportunities, and a lot of it's luck. But you also still have to go and acquire the skills and put yourself in a position to be able to benefit from luck. And you also have to sometimes be presented with an opportunity that you don't feel you're quite ready for. You say yes and you figure it out. Same thing happened with public speaking, which has blown up the last couple of years. I would travel to a lot of events, supported, just kept showing up, just meeting people. And one of my friends who ran an event in Spokane, Washington, his name is Tim Arndt. Great event, went there 2018, 2019, met him in 2017 at a different event. And come 2021, when the world is still completely unraveled, he's determined to do his during the summer and needs a speaker and asked me to come. And I was like, oh, well, why don't you get Lee Boyce or blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, I want you. And so busted my ass to do a good job with that. It went well. That led to other opportunities. The next year, it blew up like crazy. This year, it's nuts. And then now we're revamping our own event in October. We did one in 2019 here at Edmonton, but we lost the 2021. No, we're not going to talk about 2020.
There was a lot there. I'm going to do my best to try and pick apart a couple of those details. Two of the things that you mentioned stood out, and I want to dig deeper before we talk about a guy like Lee Boyce. Voraciously consuming content and the ups and downs.
Sure.
Two things that people aren't able to necessarily see.
Yes.
And you actually brought up the Lee Boyce, so it's a third point, is like, you need to be able to get yourself into a position, despite it maybe being attributed somewhat to luck, but you also need to be able to go and say yes and do those things. So that first point about voraciously consuming content, can you share how much you were listening, reading, reviewing, and then putting it into action? Obviously, you're a big guy, you're filled out, like you're reaping what you sow. What was that process like at 24 in 7 months? How much did you put on? Was that because of consuming content?
Well, I mean, I think it was just applying the classics of bodybuilding. So I remember taking old bodybuilding magazines, Muscle and Fitness and Flex and whatnot. Now, there are flaws within the information that's in there, right? Classically, you have pro bodybuilders who are describing workout routines that, you know, a modern strength and conditioning coach would look at and go, okay, that's not great. And you're giving it to mostly young guys who want to look like these bodybuilders, with the implicit like omission of one of the catalysts is the pharmaceutical side of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But here's one of the things. When we see imagery of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Ronnie Coleman and Phil Heath, and you get young men who look at that and they're going, okay, I want to look like that. And they're being told, all right, here you go to the gym, you work out, you do your bench press, you do your squats, you do your leg press, you do your rows or what have you. And you eat lots of protein and, you know, more carbs, you have to eat more fuel or whatever. Generally speaking, you're going to see most people respond fairly well and they're going to progress. Now, yes, there are flaws, like programs that have the kind of training volume that a pro bodybuilder would do, but at the same time, the stuff in the magazines actually isn't what the pro bodybuilders are doing. So while it's not necessarily the straightest path, it still gets a lot of people interested and inspired. I mean, Arnold's inspired generations of young men to want to put on muscle, get into gyms. And then you learn by doing, you learn by being around other people who know more in a gym space. And then, especially early in my career, getting access to, I found T Nation to be good because it's a very good bridge between more fundamentally sound strength and conditioning principles with a really accessible format versus like, you know, expecting a regular everyday gym goer to start reading research, which is not accessible, right? The people who are great at taking the research and distilling it into something, their media that speaks to the end user, Mike Isertel being one of the best at it, Lane Norton is great at. There's a lot of good people at this stuff. So those people, and you start consuming their content, they're the key bridge to it. But I would read T Nation. Once I started in the industry, I was reading, you know, they publish an article a day. Okay, cool. I'm reading that in the morning as I'm having breakfast. That was a ritual for years. Then you get into the YouTube stuff. Nutrition in particular, I got into Lane Norton's nutrition. He had these old video logs, which went over a lot of basic stuff. which was great. You're getting articles out of, I remember reading precision nutrition articles early on. You'd sometimes get into some of the articles on their own websites for people like your Tony Gentilcore, some of the more prolific writers out of the T Nation space. And then another really big catalyst early was starting to listen to podcasts. So it started with Lane Norton's Physique Science Radio. Sohee Lee was his co-host. That's how I found Sohee. And then, all right, well, that was sort of short-lived. So then I started finding some of Jeff Nippard's stuff. Okay. And he had an old podcast, something called, I think it was called Ice Cream Fitness, not to be confused with Jason Blaha's one. And I'm not even going to talk about Jason. He's a different sort of character. But you pick around to see what's there, and then you get onto Sigma Nutrition Radio, which is Danny Lennon. He's an Irish, brilliant authority on nutrition. And there were some other old podcasts that just didn't resonate, or I felt there was some pseudoscience to them. But then I found the Fitcast by a guy named Kevin Larrabee, who spent a lot of time at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, which is one of the more iconic places in the U.S. on strength and conditioning. Ben Bruno came out of there. Kevin Carr is the main man there, along with Mike. And Kevin Larrabee also had ties to Eric Cressy's P2P, Tony Gentilcore's Cressy Sports Performance back then. And so he brought on a lot of the guests who were part of those communities and broader. So I found out about a ton of great coaches, nutrition professionals, fitness authorities, you name it. Mm-hmm. And then I've gone on to meet a lot of those people in my travel or connect with them. A lot of them have been my podcast guests. But binging on these podcasts, and what you start doing is you're driving every day to and from work or to and from the gym or whatever. So I would just listen to podcasts, and over the course of, a couple of years, you're consuming an incredible amount. Then I got on to audiobooks, and then you'd progressively start listening at 2 times, up to eventually 2 times speed. Yeah. So I'm listening to all these business, sales, coaching, all manner of stuff, philosophy, business mindset stuff. And that stuff, starts to take root. Now, there's going to be people who are going to say, well, consuming so much isn't very useful. You need to act on it. Well, okay, sure. But it starts with philosophies and principles and attitudes that shifts your mindset that will turn into action. Now, if someone's not acting on it, you've got a problem, because people can literally just consume all this motivational, these books, not actually do anything. But the fact is, I was executing on these things along the way. And you also know, all right, these are the resources to go back to when you need something specific. Let's say there's a formula for something that I don't need to use now, but later on, you literally know where it is. You go back, you use the steps that are in there. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what I mean. If you're hungry, if you're interested, it can feel overwhelming, but you just pick something that appears to be a really credible resource, and you just dive through it and then you will find other credible resources, and then you gradually. And sometimes it just starts with following someone on social media to have that superficial touch point, and you kind of tease out more pieces from it, and then you decide, okay, I like this, I want to go deeper, let's see what else they got. Oh, they've got a book. Oh, they've got a course. Oh, there's a video series. Oh, there's a podcast. And you get into the long form content, which is also a really key component to brand for coaches, because there's a lot of young coaches who, they're very savvy about social media. Some have had success or some have had none, and they get frustrated. But they also, I noticed, crave the status of being the people who are writing for the publications or speaking on the speaking circuit, and they're missing all of the things that go into along the way, the skill acquisition, putting your head down and just working on these things. And it starts with writing for your own website and putting yourself in rooms and showing up at events, meeting people, being of service. And something I didn't mention in all this is, along the way, you're sharing and supporting people through your media. Right? Mm-hmm. So without any expectation for return, none of it's transactional. You literally just keep sharing good stuff. I recently got connected with Adam Bornstein. Adam just wrote a book called You Can't Screw This Up. It's an amazing nutritional resource. Anybody would benefit from it, not just coaches, literally written for the end user. And I met Adam briefly in 2017 at my friend Luca Hosevar's event. Now, just a brief touch point, got him to sign a copy of his book. Do I have it here? I think it might be downstairs. One of his old books. But I've been sharing Adam's stuff on Facebook going back nearly 10 years. And then all of a sudden he reaches out to me, because Luca put him on to me, and to help support the promotion of his book. So got to know Adam, and next thing you know, you're texting back and forth, and then he's Arnold's longtime nutrition coach, mm-hmm. which he's sort of kept quiet, right? Mm-hmm. He ghost writes big books for other authors. But I've been supporting him the entire way. without any expectation. Then years later, here he is going, hey, can you help me with something? And then he's the one who featured me through Arnold's newsletter. But yeah, it's show up, it's share, it's support, no expectation of return. Consume knowledge, but develop skills that will put you in positions to benefit from luck when luck happens. And again, showing up is key to, creating luck. And underlying all this, and something that I sort of missed, but it's actually fundamental, is the fact that you are of service and doing a great job with the client in front of you. Nothing matters more than the person in front of you, the work you're doing. And if you do a really good job of that and those people are happy, then the other things are bonus. But I also use lessons from the experience of coaching those people to be the inspirations for social media stuff, for articles, for talking about things in podcasts. Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of windy road there, but
I love it. It's a windy road that I can see on, and I kind of envision what my next decade is going to look like with this podcast. And I look at, how it's transpired over the past 3.5, 4 years. I didn't know about you 5 years ago. Through the past 2-3 years, I've chatted with other people and I've identified you as a thought leader. Now it's a surreal moment to be able to get you on the podcast. But you talked about a surreal moment getting featured on Schwarzenegger's newsletter. What was that like?
So there's two completely different sides to it. I mean, one, incredible honor, right? I think a lot of coaches, if you told them, hey, you're going to get to put in a workout and get your name in Arnold Schwarzenegger's newsletter and a tag link back to your Instagram. And most coaches would think, wow, that would blow up my social media following. It's going to mean, lots of client inquiries. No, none of that, right? Nothing happened. Very cool honor, got shared on my media. Arnold shared it through his Instagram story. I was like, holy shit, okay, yeah. Cool. But it didn't make me go viral, right? Yes, I have a larger social media following relative to most people, but that's a product of something every single day for, 3.5 years since I started taking Instagram seriously, but also all of the other things, the writing that goes back over almost 5 years, the podcast that goes back almost 6, relationships showing up at events. It's a cumulative effect of all those things. It's not one moment. And a lot of people are looking for that one moment to go viral, that everything takes off, but relationships and credibility are built with consistent effort over time, a lot of DMs, a lot of responding to people. If someone tags me in something, I send, most of the time it's a voice message to say thank you, answer questions. I try to respond to comments as much as I can. I definitely prioritize the DMs directly. And bring this back. It was a really nice feather in the cap, right? It's a logo that I can put on my website and say as featured in along with all the other ones. But it didn't move the needle in any other sort of meaningful way, nor did I expect it to, because Arnold's subscribers are there for Arnold and Arnold's brand, because he's not just, there are people in our industry who are very well known, very well respected, like a Mike Israetel, a Lane Norton, there's others. Nobody, or very rarely, are those guys walking down the street and someone stops them and says, hey, you're so-and-so, right? Like, they're not getting mobbed the way that, if you get a Michael Jackson walking, or a Michael Jackson or Britney Spears or something, these iconic moments in their lives, literally can't walk around in public. Elvis Presley, Madonna, etc. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is a celebrity of that level, right? So he is a super iconic, one of the, maybe in theory, one of the 10 to 20 most famous celebrities, personalities in the history of, certainly in modern history, when you think about it, right?
For sure. So
people are very much showing up for him. They don't care who I am. They may have liked the workout, but they're not going, oh, who's this person? It's not the sort of thing that translates that way. And people might be very surprised by it, but that's a reality. And I knew that going in. So it was a cool honor. And then moving on, it didn't change my business in any sort of way.
It's interesting because you'd expect, from the outside, that you get that kind of exposure. It would lead to a couple. Hey, like you said, a feather in the cap, right? I am curious about the relationship that you have with Lee Boyce. He actually wanted to ask a question around how you were able to build that social media following. I guess you mentioned it, 3.5 years, Instagram every day. Is there anything else in particular that's allowed you? Is it your ability to translate research papers and bring it into layman's terms so that general pop can consume that information? Is there anything in particular with your social that's allowed you to grow it to the state that it is?
There's a lot of dimensions to it. So I'll go back to how I know Lee as well. So one is skill of writing, right? So if you've got, the reason why I started with the Twitter graphic is because it was a popular format when I started doing this stuff in like 2019.
Yeah.
And it is something that people intuitively understand is, hey, I can share this, I can save this. It's a short, written, very accessible visual thing that you have your little icon, your image on it, your name, but the message is the star. And there's a mistake a lot of people are making. There are people who've done really well with viral video-based content. There's a guy who I used to mentor, and I do not take credit for the format at all. He learned this formula elsewhere. His name is Stephen Keen, and he's based out of Britain. British accent, like funny, makes a lot of self-deprecating jokes about his height. He's not tall. And
short king,
and he like a lot of sexual innuendo, and he figured out a formula, and he went from 4,000 followers to over 500,000 in the space of maybe about a little over half a year, and it worked. But he's the exception. Now I don't even know if I necessarily would want that level of rush and growth, but he's very good with video-based content. Cool, awesome. But for most people, what I've noticed is, especially when I'm analyzing what's going on with, I've got a friend who I literally did an analysis of his social media stuff. I do this sort of thing. And his videos were not doing well. And they were these teased out video captions from podcasts with the captions splayed up there. And there was a lot of them, but they were basically getting no engagement from his following. So there's a whole bunch of things going on there. And then he would have intermittent text-based posts that were doing much better. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's not about you, except for the example of the Arnold, where people are literally interested in Arnold. People are actually interested in how you can help them, how you make them feel, and the ideas. And the reason why people will share social media content is because it's social capital for them to share to their followers. So I am not social capital to people, but my ideas or these principles are, and the better written and accessible and resonant the metaphor, the example, the tactical element of it, the more likely someone is to share it, which is the primary driver behind how well something does on a social media algorithm, a mature algorithm like Instagram. And that's where, people kept sharing. It brought in more people. Then there's the relationship where I'm traveling. Yeah. I know, industry authorities. I've had a lot of them on the podcast, so the podcast actually helps deepen those relationships. I've met, and Jordan Syatt's a good friend, and we have hung out in person a few times, but it took years. But we had him on the podcast years ago, and then he's been back a few times. And both listening to him was a big frame for how I approach my social media, but also that relationship. In the first year, when I went from just starting with 3,000 followers and it grew to about 10.5, which was 2020's span, Jordan Syatt shared one of my posts and in his story tagged me, and I gained 10% of my following overnight.
Whoa.
Right? So
he's also a past guest of the show too.
Jordan's amazing.
Yeah,
right? He's done incredible things. And he's a really good example of someone who's done well with media. And then Dr. Mike Israetel, who I met in 2017 when he came here to town, sat down, had dinner with him. Great guy. He's been on the podcast a bunch. And Mike in 2020 was taking my posts and literally sharing them to his wall and tagging me, which would drive rushes of followers my way.
Was he still eating chicken sausages and all the crazy stuff he eats on his?
He was wearing Crocs for sure. That's I don't know what he was eating at the time. I mean, Mike's hysterical. We weigh about the same, and he's about 8 inches shorter than me, so it's terrifying. Bowling ball,
yes, muscle, fire hydrant.
That also is very good at jiu-jitsu. So very
scary man. Yeah,
smart and intelligent. So you have those friends who are sharing your media, and then you get people like Jonathan Goodman and T Nation as a brand. My stuff's getting out through their media. So it was a magnifier of this growth. So that's one of the big things. And then there's the internal behavior of not thinking, well, like a lot of people make the mistake, well, I just want the status and I want people to worship me, but I actually don't want to make any effort, which is funny because people want results without effort, whether it's dieting, whether it's athletic performance, whether it's career and building a business. It's why people get lured into, multi-level marketing schemes and pyramid stuff like that. or whatever the quick fix mentality that they have, when what built a lot of this stuff was just everyday touch points of like looking and seeing that someone sent me a message in DM. Instead of just ignoring it and going, oh, I don't have time for that, it's taking the bit of time to send a quick voice message, which is very personalized, and or even a video message, and say, listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Answer the question. Be a genuine human being. People want the social media reverence without actually being social. I mean, what is the point of social media if not to be social? Yeah. And yes, there are limits and boundaries on your time, but I mean, I still manage to do it at a following level I have, which as of right now, will just for context, is 124,000 followers.
I think it was 127 now. I think
no, it's still 124.
No, is it?
Still
I could have sworn.
I never count ahead. It grows. But if someone's got, 2,000 followers or 5,000 or something shy of 50, I mean, I'm empathetic to the person who's got 2 kids running a full-time business, and that's a very different thing. But you know what? You can find the time to send a quick voice message to say thank you to someone who did ultimately share and support your stuff. And it deepens relationships. I've got people who've been very engaged with my media on a nearly daily basis for a few years. Wow. And I actually know them all by name. You remember these people and it's like, oh, that person posted a comment again. I gotta say thank you, right? And so stuff like that, it's a mindset, right? It's the action, sure, but it's the underlying mindset of being very grateful for the fact that these people seem to care about what I'm doing and saying, and therefore just try to be a decent human being to them, right? So there's a lot of different stuff to that. And then you asked about Lee Boyce. So I met Lee, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was one of the speakers. We'd already had him on the podcast, and he was the speaker at, if I'm not mistaken, the 2019, I think it was the 2019, yes, 2019 Kansas City Fitness Summit, the third year in a row I'd been there. We'd already started figuring out our event, so Lee was one of the speakers we'd slated for it. And so, see him, hang out right away, and Lee just is like, yo, give me your number. Like, it's just like that, right? So he just grabbed on, and we've just chatted all the time. We've become very good friends, and he's in my plans for our 2023 one this October. We've spoken at other events together, raised the bar in Dallas this past February. And, he's just someone that he's always been a positive influence on me, even though he's quite a bit younger than me. He got started very early. And, it's just those people, you share, you support them, and oftentimes people will turn around and deeply value those relationships. And it's not about what you can get out of it. It's also about being on the same path with kindred spirits, people who are sharing your journey, who could be inspirations, break you out of comfort zones, challenge you. And it's cool to have people I've looked up to become good friends.
Yeah. That it just stood out to me. This morning I was listening to your podcast where you featured Lee, and one of the things you guys talked about was not being able to accept every podcast request that you get. You do. Lee isn't necessarily able to. He brought that up. You make an effort to say yes to everything, which is kudos to you. Obviously you're on this one. But it's not easy when your time becomes a constraint, and your time is valuable because, like you said, the most important person is that client that you're training in front of you. We had the same interaction, Lee and I. It was basically like, hey, obviously we're aligned, trying to do similar things. For yourself, like, was there ever a point where you questioned what you were doing, or was it always you're like, I know I love this, I feel good, what I'm doing is impacting people positively? Those ups and downs I'm referring to, you like those downs moments, people obviously don't typically share those on social.
So it's wise to put this in context. For most of my career, I'm the trainer, and it's my livelihood and the client in front of me, and that's really all there is, right? It's easy to think now with some of the other trappings of status, as I put it, even though I don't like people thinking in terms of status, the fact that I write for what I do, the public speaking, it can sometimes feel like those things were always there, right? They were destined to be, when in fact, no. Like, I have to go back in time to remember being the trainer at that commercial gym and the ups and downs. I mean, I was always busy. Like, I think after about a year and a half to the time I was done, I did the most training sessions year over year in that company. There are other people who are pumping them out, but my bandwidth to do that and to keep myself busy was very high. But even within that, there were periods where there were problems. I had some good managers interspersed with a lot of really bad managers. I had managers who had brought in a multi-level marketing scam, and they were recruiting, very predatory recruiting. There was a lot of, there was sexual harassment in that environment a lot. And those were frustrating battles to where, because I wasn't tolerant of these things and trying to push back, while being fearful for not losing my job on my livelihood and my connection to my clients, which are, of course, even though we had the relationship, they were bound to the gym in terms of the sessions. Mm-hmm. And I didn't, at the time, early days, have, I could just go over to an Evolve Strength, open my own business. So a lot of it, there was a surprising amount of survival mode to just keep my head down and manage it while trying to balance out the threats that were going on there. And there was a point where I got a second job, just because things were a little slower. Me and my friends, we'd been going out to the bars a little too much. This is a long time ago.
Okay.
And so we decided, all right, let's just work in them. So we started working as bouncers all in this one club. And it was fun. I actually met a lot of really great people. I have a lot of great friends in my life to this day because of that. And I'm very grateful for it. But crap happened there too. And that wasn't a great environment in the long run. And thankfully things at the gym settled down. But eventually I had to leave because the level of harassment directed at me was so bad that it's like I need to control my own fate, and I need to be able to do the best I can to preserve the relationships that I have with my clientele, do it honorably. And so, ultimately I left, and thankfully my clientele chose to follow me because of the strength of the relationship.
It's a testament to your work, yeah.
But that stuff was forefront. So you'd be surprised at how much of this was very focused. I mean, it's being of service and understanding the impact and loving it, but not having a concept of any road to being able to scale its magnitude through social media or any other long form media. I wasn't thinking about those things. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about livelihood and changing lives on a smaller scale, right? Now I look at it and the livelihood is substantially more secure than it was in those days. And again, I have all these other outlets. Those are great. I feel very fulfilled by them. I enjoy them a lot. I never lose sight of the fact that the client in front of me is still the most important thing that exists. And it's what has allowed me to do the other things. But for a big chunk of my career, and it's easy for me to forget, that it was livelihood and service, if that answers your question.
100%. Livelihood and service probably should be at everyone's top priority.
Absolutely. And I allude to, again, I don't begrudge the young trainer who wants to make a greater impact. I know that's a generational difference. People will complain about millennials, and now it's iGen. I'm a Gen Xer. Mm-hmm. Where, they don't want to pay their dues, or they don't want to grind, or they don't, blah, blah, blah. They want all these things now. The flip side is they're also less tolerant of putting their head down for low pay, doing shitty jobs in the old economy where you were promised that if you do this for long enough, you will earn disproportionate rewards later. Well, that's sort of like, that world doesn't even exist anymore.
You don't think so?
I mean, not in the same way. So we're talking about the industrial, a lot of the industrial sort of age of work for the same company, learn the skills, pay your dues, work your way up, get the, your
you got to take care of number one.
Your retirement plan, retire with the golden watch, all that sort of stuff, right? The kind of the factory mentality, whether it was a literal factory or, even the white collar factory of the, 80s, 90s. Right. Of the business world, right? That dynamic is no longer the prevailing thing. Mm-hmm. There's less loyalty to companies. Job security is nowhere near what it used to be. Good luck if there's a pension plan involved. And so a lot of people now, younger people, there's more of an entrepreneurial spirit to it, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
And so the young coaches in more of a hurry, often enough to maybe think that, well, if I blow up my social media, that'll get me the clients that I want to get. And then I think all those coaches are in a bit of a hurry to go online as opposed to just do it, work the hours on the gym floor. And I think maybe you don't have to do it the way I did it, although there were a lot of benefits to it. But I also think that the rush for the social media status is not the answer either. And I think you still have to focus on the person in front of you, be of service. You do a really good job of it, more people will show up at your door because you'll be referred business. People will see what you're doing. And if you document it through your media and let people see it, then generally speaking, more people start plugging into it. If you get really good at capturing the wisdom, the experience, the knowledge into something that people will consume, whether it's podcasts, whether it's long form writing, whether it's short pieces of video-based or written-based content on whatever social media platform you're using, whether it's Instagram or obviously TikTok's more video-based, and you get good at that over time, then it generates leverage for the long run.
That right there was, you hit the nail on the head. It's like consistent effort over time. You're not trying to be transactional in your efforts. And at the end of the day, if you can be servant and providing them with that experience, wisdom, you're going to pay dividends in the long run. I took out one of your tweets to ask you about that.
Sure.
You talked about the importance of children seeing parents work out, especially with mothers and daughters.
Right.
Can you expand on the importance of this representation in a child's life?
So the most popular tweet, the most viral tweet post of all time that I keep reusing because people love it. So there's a lot of dimensions. One is kids are going to emulate, model behaviors that parents engage in. How many people, especially women, how many women grew up with a mother who used a lot of language, negative self-talk about their body image, negative body image, and a lot of language and behavior around dieting, right?
Probably a ton.
People talk about diet culture, what have you, and there's a lot of dimensions to that. But what did that make normal? Think about how normalized that sort of stuff became to a generation of, and it's not just women. I mean, men are affected by it too. I think slightly on average, it's more applicable to women. So and I'm not a parent, but as a generation of parents, the things you say and the things you do, the behaviors you model, will shape the attitudes and the beliefs and the language that people use in their own internal dialogue about themselves. And if kids see parents who are engaged in physically active behavior, which I did see my parents do, then that becomes a more normal thing for them to do. So, and the specific example in the post is also how many people, men or women, their first experience with a gym environment literally is in their 30s or 40s. They are overweight to varying degrees, and they're intimidated by the stereotypes, the negative stereotypes of that environment, right? And then think about, how many people grew up, and I see this a lot where they're like, yeah, my parents brought me to the gym, or maybe they're just in like the daycare, or they're like be able to watch. It's not maybe necessarily like a commercial gym, which doesn't generally allow kids on the floor. Evolve, for example, where I contract, kids are allowed on the floor, right? You can't be running around like underneath people doing Olympic lifting. But same thing with the dogs in there, right? The dogs are allowed in there. Just you got to make sure that they're not doing anything that's going to get anybody hurt.
Yeah.
But outside of that, a lot of kids grew up in that environment, and this was normal. So maybe it inspired them to be more physically active from a very young age, where it took root. Or maybe they didn't stick with them right away, but they found their way back later in life, and it was still a normal place and something that was normalized to them when they grew up. Right? And so if we can magnify that for the generation going forward, because I'm going to say something that a lot of people may not like, but to an extent, given the sheer challenge of like reversing, a societal trend of obesity, and there's a lot of complex social demographic, accessibility elements to things like obesity, and then the association with long-term negative metabolic health outcomes. There are people that don't like narratives around that, but whatever the case, we know that inactivity, not maintaining lean muscle mass, poor diet, and then you compound it with things like smoking, drinking, etc. Those things increase the likelihood of long-term poor metabolic health and lifestyle disease. We know that. So let me get myself back on track here. So if we've got people who already have these behaviors normalized, they're a lot less likely to probably fall prey to this. And then what I was saying is, I do think that this generation is lost. I think the battle is ultimately lost as far as the societal statistics, okay? It's not to say that an individual can't make substantial changes. There's a lot of elements that go into it. But as a society, the metabolic health of this particular adult population is never going to be reversed on a societal level to where we see obesity rates drop to pre-1970s levels. Okay, metabolic health is not going to change on that unless there's some sort of absolutely miraculous pharmaceutical medical breakthrough that just deals with all this stuff, right? We got drugs like Ozempic, which actually has promise. People have their thoughts about it. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah.
But there's hope for the next generation. So if we can give that gift forward, it's literally giving a gift forward to, you know, the next generation of kids. And instead of just letting people skip phys ed, also fixing, you know, phys ed classes, but keeping more kids active. And it's not about forcing kids to do anything. That's not it at all. It's about creating access, modeling the behavior, making it normal, and letting those kids choose ultimately what they want to do. Or maybe they find their way back to it later in life where it's like, hey, this is not a scary, intimidating place. This is a place I have fond memories of because my parents used to go there, right?
I could not have said it better myself. The reason I asked these questions, as we talked about before we started recording, the Athletes Podcast goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire that next gen. So your answer was perfect there, but it also ties into the fact that everyone's an athlete. And the way I like to say that in preface is we're all human beings and we're all built to perform to one degree or another. You pointed out the fact that maybe the recent generations haven't done a good enough job about keeping that performance at a certain level. What are some things that people should be doing to ensure that they are in, I won't say peak optimal health, but at least above average? Maybe we'll go like a C plus B or like, you know, whatever you're striving for that should be at least better than where we're currently at, because we've established that our society is not in the greatest point. Are there some actionable steps that people could be taking?
I mean, that's
a loaded
10
question.
hours a course, you know, an entire university degree. I'm going to quickly shout out a good friend of mine. His name is Luca Hosevar. If you're ever in the Seattle area, he's got a gym, Renton, just outside of Seattle. And his moniker, his literal phrase is athlete for life. And he just recently put up an article, a big training resource that's called Athlete for Life. And so he's all about training behaviors that promote activity, athleticism, strength, performance, all that. So, I mean, I don't even know where to begin with this because it depends on each person's individual circumstance.
That's the way you should answer it, though.
And right. Someone who's listening to this probably has a significant amount of advantages. Anyway, it depending on where you are, it means looking at what is an accessible, gradual action that you can take. You think about the action in front of you versus, you know, the mountain. And I mean, for me recently, I read a really great book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's by an author named B. Wilson. It's a lot of modern food anthropology and the changes in dietary behaviors in cultures around the world, like in recent history, and it's fascinating. And it got me thinking, all right, cool. I actually would really like to start eating more vegetables again. I'm not bad. I used to be terrible.
Okay.
And so for me, you know, you think about, all right, well, what is something that you've liked in the past? Something that I like is I'll make a spinach salad. So I'll get some cherry tomatoes.
Yeah.
I will get some baby spinach, fresh baby spinach. And I like cutting up red onion in it, right? And then maybe it's like a light vinaigrette or something like that.
It's great.
You know, drown it and stuff. Anyway, so I like that. And you can think about, all right, well, what are ways? So that's it's filling. It's got a lot of green vegetables, which most people are probably not getting enough of. And I actually really like it. So I'll give a really good example. This one maybe on the nutritional side might be the best advice I've got. I've said this before on other podcasts. Identify 3 buckets of food types, behaviors that you have. Think about the healthy, home-cooked, and again, not everybody has the advantage and the schedule that makes home cooking easy, but you think about the things that you really enjoy. Like, hey, it's healthy, you like it, but you actually, like, it's healthy, it's accessible, but you like it. All right, that's good. The stuff that you would rather have, time and preparation is usually the issue, which is what leads people to order out, skip the dishes, like whatever. Delete the food delivery apps. Just get rid of them. Seriously. Increase the friction for that. That's a little step that'll help. But then identify how much mediocre crap are you eating? Stuff that isn't fulfilling. You're eating because you didn't plan ahead. You're on the run. You now need something. You're hungry. The stuff that you're snacking on, not because you're actually physiologically hungry, because you're bored, or there's a trigger behavior where every time you sit down in front of the TV, it means you have to crack a beer or have the popcorn or the bag of chips because those things are in your food environment because you're bringing them into the house. Okay, but look at it and go, all right, Now, there are people that really love their chips. Cool. We're going to get to that in a second. But for everybody else who's ever caught themselves like eating crackers because they're just bored, it's like, okay, cool. Let's identify that and go, how many times have you gone, like my example is mall food court Chinese food. If you ever go in there, for plenty of time, you see this stuff, you're like, oh, that looks really good. And we all know it's rubbish. It's terrible. You never feel good after eating it. You feel like you wasted the calories. You feel like you wasted your money. It's not like the good Chinese food that you have a couple times a year that you order out that costs like, $60 to $100 that shows up. It's just amazing. And you got leftovers for 3 days. That stuff's good. The mall food court stuff is rubbish. So you identify how you feel, and then you go, all right, well, I'm going to literally decide in advance, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to go down the aisle where that is to have it at the house. And then you go to bucket number 3. What are the things that you treasure, that you love? For me, I use example, I love Reese Peanut Butter Cup Dairy Queen Blizzards. And so I give myself one every Saturday after a leg day. And it's a ritual that I've now adopted. But it's also a boundary around it so I don't have one every single day.
Yeah.
Thank God there's not a DQ near my house or I'd be in a lot of trouble. And I sit, and instead of like driving and like mindlessly eating or whatever, I literally stop right outside the DQ in the parking lot, and I just sit there and I turn everything off and I just enjoy it. Right? And to me, it's become a ritual that I savor, that no mediocre junk crap is ever going to compare to how good that is. I would rather have that and look forward to it. And knowing that I have permission to enjoy it guilt-free means I can look forward to it and say no to the other, like, just impulsive crap that comes along. And it's not like flipping a switch, but it's this mindset that may get people to eat more of the first category, set boundaries around, identify what you love, so you have a bucket 3. You still have to have some boundaries because you have to eat like adults. It can't be, it can't be like ice cream for breakfast every single day and then wine for dinner, right? Yeah. And if it's the person who, like a lot of people, like, oh, I need my 2 glasses of wine every night to de-stress, you actually have to have a serious fucking conversation about that, because you cannot meet your long-term metabolic health goals and do that. That's just, let's cut the shit. That doesn't work, okay? Maybe we can scale that back a little bit. We're not talking going cold turkey, but maybe it's, Saturday night, there's 2 glasses of wine, right? And then for the rest of the week, it starts out as like 1 instead of 2, and then gradually you remove some of those nights over time until finally you turn it into something you savor versus something that's so regular that you don't even savor it because it's just so routine, right? So there's a lot of stuff here, but I actually think if we start to categorize these sort of things, identify the things that are truly meaningful, the healthy things we enjoy, I think it's actually very easy to go, well, I don't even want this other crap.
It is very easy. And especially once you start viewing it and realizing how your body feels after you consume that, you're like, oh, that is crap, and I don't need that, and it's not helping me towards my long-term goals. The other thing first off, your social media is great, and you talked about that Dairy Queen on your Instagram story, and I was like, Phoenix is a big Dairy Queen fan, so she's smiling and like, oh, I could do this once a week. Maybe if you apply some of the bucket theories that he talked about also, I would say yes, and I'm cool with that. We'll see if that actually comes into fruition. You talked about modifying your workout when the gym is busy so that you can use the equipment that you do plan on using, which is like also rearranging your schedule to fit in a workout. How do you make sure that you are getting the job done when you maybe don't have access to all those things like you talked about, whether it's the time to prepare, the gym? Like, are there specific I guess routines isn't the right word, but ways that you can get those things in throughout the day?
It starts with the mindset of being open to it, right? We can train people to develop a skill to do something that's a positive, right? And you take the person who never worked out and you give them a routine, then getting them into the gym and doing the routine with as little friction as possible is an important start. But that can become maladaptive if the person goes into the gym, it's busy, and they can't get the piece of equipment in the order that they need. They get frustrated, they leave. We definitely see this sort of thing happening. So it's stages. Is you get people in and you teach them the skills, but then as quickly as possible, whether it's you doing it on your own or especially if it's a coach teaching it, is to teach people the skill of alternatives and substitutions for specific exercises. The fact that you can do exercises in different orders. Yes, there is a priority order in a sense of the larger, heavier compounds to the lighter, isolated movements, but getting the workout in and doing the things you need to do is better than getting frustrated and not being able to do half of it because the gym is busy. So it's understanding that, hey, this is a skill you actually have to develop. And then when you go in with that mindset, and then you start to learn to plan ahead. Okay, if I can't get this, then I can do any one of these things. And if you have those options and alternatives and you feel comfortable with it, then you're probably okay.
Yeah.
I mean, even at my experience level, yeah, there are still times where, hey, I want to use that thing. There's 3 guys standing around it with a tripod. It's like, okay, I'm not going to get that for half an hour, and I have to leave, so I got to go do something else. And it's very easy to get frustrated and annoyed. But if you have the skill of, okay, I can actually go do that, that does the same thing, that machine is just as good as that free weight, which it is, by the way, then just go sit down in the machine, crank out the sets, and then move on, right?
Yeah, you're reverse engineering what your goal, whatever you need to get there.
I think so, yeah.
I have one other question, but you said the free weight or the machine is just as good as the free weight. I have not heard as many strength coaches say that. Could you elaborate?
So there's a few dimensions to it. First of all, I can't remember where I saw this, but there's definitely some research recently that points to machines being as effective for muscle building as free weight. There's a lot of things you have to equate for research to work that way. It's going to be training volume, essentially, going to be the one major factor, right?
Yeah.
But so for a very long time, I think we had this attitude that, well, you're not training your stabilizer muscles and blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not really super well supported by research. Do I think that it makes more sense for someone who is, playing sports to probably do split squats more often than, say, leg press? Of course, yes, absolutely. But for the everyday person who needs to build muscle mass and leg strength, and if the idea of doing split squats is going to be so torturous that they're not consistently doing it, whereas sitting on a leg press and executing properly is something that they can handle, guess what? The leg press in that context is superior, right? It's certainly equivalent, and it may in fact be superior. If you're less sore because you did the leg press versus the split squat, because split squats are notorious for creating soreness, because the position, the deep glute stretch you get in the bottom of it, then again, it may be something that people will keep coming back to and do, right? Because again, what are we trying to do? Is the battle isn't. There's a lot of people in our industry who are caught up in like optimal. Well, there's. I'm not going to say the name, but there's a famous podcast and someone who has the appearance of an incredible amount of authority, but tends to go wildly outside of his scope of practice, and then get on with a whole bunch of rubbish, say something, claim there's studies, and then a bunch of really smart people who know this stuff will go and tear it apart and go, those studies didn't say that, or those studies don't even exist, or it applies to like rodent models, right? So they rip what he's doing apart. And then you get people in the industry who are talking about little fine-tuning optimality of this exercise versus this exercise, or all this other sort of rubbish. And I look at the stuff as like, this is such a minuscule piece of the puzzle. And it's fine if you're speaking to that audience who literally wants to tinker with and optimize this stuff, assuming what you're saying is actually right, which half the time it's not. Not going to get into that either. There's a lot of people who build brand around being creative, and no, all of the classic things about training ever is garbage. All the stuff that all these bodybuilders were always doing is really bad. If Ronnie Coleman only did this single arm cable exercise, he would like no. You're just being contrarian, and people mistake being contrarian for actually having like intellectual thought, right? No. So there's a lot of silly stuff in our industry, but it gets confusing for the everyday person. So don't get caught up in optimality, okay? Get caught up in how can we reduce the friction so that way more people who are currently inactive or underactive, who have poor dietary habits and other lifestyle things that are not working for them, who don't sleep very well, how can we actually reduce the friction so that they can sleep better, be more active, eat a little bit better, feel welcome in this space that traditionally, may sometimes only feel welcome to like the type of people who are like literally photoshopped on social media, right? How can we get everybody to feel welcome in these environments and give them some very basic skills so that way they're starting to make progress? And I think that's the stuff that more coaches can do really well and not get caught up in all of this like hyper fine tuning. Yes, there's an audience for it, and I'm not interested in policing that out, but I just don't think that stuff actually helps very many people. And so for the person who's worried, let's say anybody listening is themselves a coach, a trainer, and where I said I was in the past resonates with you because you're like, that's where I am right now. then just show up and keep helping people, but figure out ways to actually make it easier for people. Get more people in the door of a gym, right? Whether that's like starting with them as kids, or just give people some basic actionable things that helps them improve their nutrition lifestyle just a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? And they can compound upon that, because those little wins will feel good. They'll notice that they feel better. After a little while, they'll like what they see in the mirror, and they'll build some momentum. Okay. I think that helps on a societal level, and most individuals a lot more.
Yeah, 100% it does. And it's just comes back to, like you said, making it easier for people to get in there. You've brought up drinking a couple of times. I noticed you had a decent bar downstairs.
Yep.
Do you drink occasionally? What's your approach on that?
Interesting. So I had a friend in my life who I spend less time with, who is probably the most negative influence when it came to drinking behavior. Is also irony that he's the one who his skill and expertise is the type of renovations that he wanted to do on the house, which actually built that bar. Okay. So that bar actually ends up being more for show than anything else. Like, I did sit down and have a Corona last night.
Okay.
I'm a Fast and Furious guy, so I like,
okay,
you can have any beer you want as long as it's a Corona. But I used to own a nightclub.
Yeah.
So when I alluded to ups and downs, there was plenty of ups and downs when it came to a nightclub back in Newfoundland. My family's in the bar business. They own a pub in Newfoundland. My brother runs it along with my dad. And I definitely tipped over an edge to where it became a very problem lifestyle behavior in my mid-late 20s.
Okay.
And, it takes a little while to uproot that. It's literally why I moved across country, to change the environment, right? So I've been on that side of it. I have a much healthier relationship with it now, but what I realized is over time, I've consumed less and less alcohol because it doesn't make me feel good. So I'm so busy with all the work projects I'm doing that, if I turn around and just sit down and crush a lot of alcohol on a given weekend night, or God only knows a weekday night, then I don't feel well the next day, and it disrupts my nutritional behavior, disrupts how I am with other people. It interferes with my mental energy to work on the projects I'm working on. And so, yes, you saw a very, very elaborate bar because people keep bringing me stuff that I'm not consuming at the same rate that they're bringing it to me. So the damn thing's overflowing with I do like very good scotch.
Okay.
And what I'll do sometimes is I'll sit down and I'll have a glass of scotch as a moment to kind of celebrate something that, I've accomplished or what have you. Now, like, celebrating with alcohol in terms of like just going crazy, hyper normalized. We're talking about a glass of scotch to sip on and enjoy. It's kind of like that bucket 3 thing. It's another one of those bucket 3 behaviors where it's like, hey, I can enjoy this as a treat, but I'm not crushing, a third of a bottle of scotch every single night. That feels, you don't get drunk on scotch. It's a terrible experience. Okay, don't do that.
I only ask because it's something that I, consumed a ton during university, and I see others doing it, athletes, whatever. It's part of the kind of, like you said, the celebratory thing, whatever it is, but it does make you feel like crap the next day. It's taking all that joy that you get during the moment is taken from the next day.
I mean, you can always cherry pick examples to prove the rule, but for anybody who's like a hockey fan, you could look at someone like Danny Heatley is fairly iconic and rumor based as being like a hardcore party guy, and there's plenty of players that came in and out of Edmonton in the last 20 years who are well known. You'd see them out in the bars all the time, and one notable figure ended up going to rehab and turning his career around. But Heatley was a 50 goal scorer, superstar in the league.
In 07.
Yeah,
50
in 07, which is a running joke. But I mean, he was out of the league at 30, 31, right? He was completely ineffective at that. And there's probably a correlation there between those behaviors. I mean, he literally got a friend of his killed, Dan Schneider, in a car accident when they were prospects, which may or may not have involved that kind of lifestyle behavior. So I don't know the specifics, so it's not fair to say, but there's a pattern of behavior there. And then you get guys like Zdeno Chara and Jaromir Jagr, who probably know how to like have a beer at a good time, but they're so focused on their bodies and conditioning and strength training and everything that they were playing at a very high level into their mid 40s. I mean, Jagr, I still think, is playing for the team that he owns.
He's Jackie Moon right now. He's general manager and playing for that team.
Which is wild, right? So, I mean, again, I've cherry picked an example to prove the rule, but it's still illustrative of the whole thing. And I'm at that age now, at 45, where it's like, okay, now these things are really important. They matter. I could get away with a lot of stuff in my late 20s, certainly even in through my mid 30s. But don't feel good about them anymore. And I've decided there's an inflection point where, yes, I want to look a certain way, I want to feel good and feel confident, but I am far more concerned with my long-term health than I ever was, because I no longer am that young, invincible, hey, I have all the time in the world person. So these things evolve over time.
Right. As they evolve, is there anything else that you're doing that for your long-term health outside of limiting the alcohol consumption?
I mean, again, eating more vegetables, I mean, I was always fairly good about cooking at home. I don't have a lot of cooking skills, but I'm trying to expand that a little bit. So that's a really big one. And my body's not as resilient as it used to be. I've noticed I've been just a bit more banged up, beaten up. I'm dealing with a chronic shoulder injury. There seems to be a nerve issue that is related to my cervical spine that has led to maybe a partial tear in my arm. So I have to modify things, and I have to find what feels good. And so I've had to modify routines. I'm not necessarily lifting as heavy in all of the things that maybe I did at my peak of what I was doing, but I'm comfortable letting that go. There's no ego that I have to bring in to compete with anybody else. I have to do what's going to be best for me, and I feel really good at 45. But there's just some stuff that are lingering issues. You also have to be willing to go to physical therapy or seek medical support to ensure that you're taking good care of yourself. You got to keep your eyes on your blood sugar or blood pressure, blood sugar, et cetera, right? And I live a pretty healthy lifestyle. I'm also trying to do more cardio.
Okay.
And one of the things that I was talking about on my media for a while is I like reading books, and I want to do more cardio. And I found it very difficult to actually endure cardio psychologically. And the thing that makes it better is if I'm reading, because I'm distracted, I'm doing something positive. I'm also stacking two habits together that I think are good, which is time efficient. So it feels emotionally like I'm doing something positive versus doing something that doesn't fit into my time. And so I find that sitting on a bike and reading a book is a really good compromise there. And I found that's been really helpful.
This conversation has been really helpful for me personally, Andrew, and I know for others it will be as well. I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, expertise. The shirt you're wearing says there's no substitute for strength. Jordan Shallow mentioned during his episode that athletes should just focus on getting stronger when they're younger. It sounded like you wanted to say something there.
Well, the shirt is my friend Kenny Santucci's shirt, his brand, and he owns a gym called the Strength Club in New York, and he's the host of an event called Stronger New York. So I was one of the speakers there last year, along with Luca Hocevar and some of my other friends. I agree with Shallow on that one, right? I think basic force production is one of the most fundamental things that athletes should be able to do, because in the gym, they're worried about force production. They're not worried about sport-specific training is a little bit overblown. You're going to be developing those skills mostly within the sport anyway. So instead of necessarily trying to have people mimic every single motion in the gym, you literally focus on getting them strong. Make sure that they're learning good movement patterns, they're not breaking their bodies up. But if you have more strength, you have more ability to exert force, which is pushing the ground away, which is sprinting and jumping, which is pushing other bodies off of you, which is the physical contact that exists within even the non-physical sports, supposedly like your soccers and your basketball, right? And the other skills can be trained while learning the sport, right? So fundamentally, it's not to say that you do it to the exclusion of all other things. You also need the appropriate level of physical conditioning to the sport. If someone's really interested in doing a deep dive into conditioning stuff, go into Joel Jamieson stuff. He's a good friend of mine. He's got a great book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning. I literally have it here behind me. It would be remiss if I didn't pull it out and share it. This thing's great, and it's the book on energy systems and conditioning. It's not just for mixed martial arts fighters, although Joel does have a legacy of working with UFC champions and some of the best in the world there, but he's worked a lot more broadly than that too.
Amazing. So you got Jordan Shallow, you're on board with that. You've got Jordan Sides, one big ass salad a day going. Yep. The way we wrap up every episode is we ask our guest what their biggest piece of advice would be for the next gen. You've covered a ton over the past hour and a bit. Is there one piece, pivotal moment, little excerpt that you want to leave the next gen with? Not just athletes, not just the 80-year-olds or the 8-year-olds, but everyone in between.
This permeates all life. And I really do think it's, be of service to people, share and support without any expectation in return. As you had said, and I often say, don't be transactional in your relationships. It is okay over time to realize that someone's not acting in your best interest, or that person is a status-seeking and transactional person, and then you can down-regulate how much you engage with the person, or you can literally like stop, because we also have to guard our emotional energy with the way that we deal with the world. We only have so much of it. But when you show up to support, be generous, usually the law of attraction, it sounds fluffy, but it works in practice very well. It'll bring good people to your table. And yes, occasionally you will have people who will take and manipulate or abuse and do not reciprocate, but you will identify those people and you'll get better at setting boundaries around them. But the net positive from all of the good that people will bring to you, you'll never be able to give that level back to the world if you are of a generous, being of service, non-transactional mindset. And it shows up in every walk of life.
Andrew Coates, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. Where can people find you on social media, and where should they be looking to get their tickets for your event that's coming up?
So I post everything on Instagram, so at Andrew Coates Fitness. That's pretty easy. Yes, my website is www.andrewcoatesfitness.com. But for our event, if you're interested, literally send me a DM, okay? I have posted about it. It's linked in my bio on my Instagram, but shoot me a message if you have questions. And we would love to see you there. It's October 13th and 14th here in Edmonton. We've actually got some pretty killer hotel rates. They're actually really low, especially for anybody traveling in from the U.S. Your exchange is killer. But our lineup is incredible. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Don Saladino, Luca Hocevar, Jordan Shallow, Dr. Sam Spinelli, me and Dean Somerset here are local. Krista Scott Dixon, one of the architects of all the PN stuff. My friend Logan Dubé is involved. Lee Boyce, Brian Cron. And my friends Dennis and Kelsey Heenan, who are up from California. They have a huge brand, and I've just recently announced that, I'm about to announce that my friend Melody Schoenfeld has been added to the lineup. We had a speaker drop out who wasn't able to make the commitment, so Melody's a legendary figure in our space and does great work. So, and I'm pretty sure I got everybody. I hope I didn't miss anyone. I think we're good.
Amazing.
And hopefully that's something that interests you guys. I'm a big believer in bringing world-class education to our doorstep here in Edmonton, and to support the speakers and to support the people who will be in the seats, because going to these kind of events changed my career forever. So I kind of want to give that one back.
You're doing all of that and more. Can't thank you enough. Hopefully we'll be able to get back from Toronto and make sure we can attend. Thanks so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I just wanted to come on and say thank you for tuning in to the Athletes Podcast. This is the 187th episode. Big shout out goes to Andrew for letting us come into his home, interview him, chat, just pick his brain, the wealth of knowledge that he is for the fitness health space. Can't thank him enough. Obviously, his contributions to men's health, T Nation, bodybuilding, etc. has been tremendous. Can't thank him enough again for letting us have a glimpse into what it's like in Andrew Coates' mind. Big shout out also goes to our producer, Phoenix Wayland. She does an amazing job. If you guys like this video, give a thumbs up so she knows how much you appreciate it. And also, don't forget about our athlete agreement. If you watch this episode, it's not free. I need you to subscribe down below, whatever platform you're watching, listening on. It helps us tremendously, proves to us that, hey, what we're doing is being worthwhile, here to educate, entertain, and inspiring that next gen. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next week for another new episode. Bye.